So we're about ready to start?
Norman, can you keep speaking?
I can hear Molly. I hear
okay,
you in the background.
Now I hear you.
Okay.
I just you're speaking like the voice of God in the studio, so I just wanted to make sure you had that nice.
Can you speak more into your speaker, Norman? Because we're having trouble getting yours as loud as Molly's.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better.
That's better.
Well, I just have to put the phone closer to my mouth.
Yeah. Put
There
it
you
as
go.
close as you can.
Is that better?
Yes.
And Paul, if you want,
And
you
then
can.
let's turn Molly down.
Yeah. About to say turn me down.
Okay.
I'm not offended.
Tapes are rolling. Whatever you want, Molly. I'm going to edit this.
Okay.
And I'll give you 5 minutes and then 2 minutes.
Yeah. All right, so I'm ready to go. And hi, this is Molly Cheshire, and this is Meetings with Remarkable People. My guest is Norman Kurland, and he is a binary economist, and he was, I guess you studied with Louis Kelso?
No, I joined up with him in 1965 after I had been doing a lot of work in Washington in the civil rights movement.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And in the anti-poverty program. I was very much involved in I wrote the guidelines for participation of the poor in the community action programs. That was during during Johnson's so-called war on poverty.
Did it work?
Did it work? No, because the system really didn't deal with what Kelso is dealing with. My interest at that time, I had come out of law school at the end, just before, 1959.
Where did you go to law school?
Chicago, and studied law and economics there. And in that, I came away with a strong revulsion against concentrated power and monopolies, and didn't have any solutions in terms of how you deal with income distribution in a market economy. And the only thing I could figure out, the best that I came across, was Milton Friedman's negative income tax, and at that time they were also talking about guaranteed annual income. So I got involved with that when I first came to Washington.
I see. Hang on, Paula. Are you hearing that kind of weird distortion on his telephone?
Yeah, and I don't know what to do about it because we have it cranked up. Just we're working on it.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that it was not me, but...
No, it's not you.
Well, I'm fascinated. So how did you come up with binary economics if it wasn't through Louis Kelso?
Because in the midst of putting together community action programs on the West Coast and dispensing millions of dollars to try to organize grassroots organizations as a political constituency to get behind the ideas of just negative income tax or the guaranteed annual income, I then discovered that the real enemy were the taxpayers. They weren't interested in organizing poor people, and consequently you could see that was not the solution. And so someone stepped into my office, a guy named Mark Goldies, and described Kelso's ideas, and then within 5 minutes it totally blew my mind, and I said, my God, why didn't I think of that? It's so obvious and so simple and so right that from there on, that was in March of 1965, I've been committed to the ideas and then began to work with Kelso. I left the government and became the director of planning of a liberal establishment organization headed by Walter Reuther, the head of the United Auto Workers. It's called the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty. And so I brought Kelso in to try to interact and influence the liberals who were then in power. And then, and we made some headway, but then Kelso and I formed the Institute for the Study of Economic Systems. I became the executive director of that. And from there on, that was in about 1968. And since that time, now, what are we talking, 40 years? That's what I've been doing. And I also work as a lawyer. I put together employee-owned companies using Kelso's financing techniques.
And how has that worked?
Oh, well, it works. That's interesting. It works if you enable the workers to have the full private property rights as owners and not treat them as simply beneficial owners and having power concentrated at the top without any accountability, without any transparency. So you end up in many of the employee stock ownership plans. They don't work.
Well, when you say that power is not just concentrated at the top, does that mean that the employees actually have an impact on how the company is run?
Well, in this sense, they're as shareholders.
Right.
In other words, as shareholders, they should have the right to vote their shares and influence who sits on the board. Vote for who's on the board. And it's like the Republican form of government, that you delegate your power, but you as a citizen have the right to know what's going on and the right to throw out the board or replace the board. And the board, in turn, hires and fires managers. So what it comes down to, Molly, is what makes the difference between a good ESOP and a poorly run ESOP is management philosophy. And that's why we had to invent a new management philosophy that we call justice-based management. And, if you want to think conceptually, if you want to visualize conceptually what we're talking about, think of the pyramid as the traditional form of leadership in most organizations, including corporations, where the one at the top really doesn't have to be accountable to anyone else. And he controls. He's the pharaoh. And consequently, you end up with human nature taking place. When you have someone who's not accountable, they tend to take care of themselves at the expense of others.
Well, I mean, but you can sometimes have the philosopher king. It's not always. The problem is that if you have a great leader, the company runs great, and if you don't have a great leader, it runs, as you say, according to the worst of human nature.
Right, and that's the key, is the leader, to tell you the truth. You have leaders who are not afraid of being accountable to people and being open. They are really, the great leaders are teachers. In other words, they understand that they're the role models. They have to help empower others and enrich others, and if they do that, and serve others. So it's the whole notion of the servant leader. And
right.
Those are the good people. And they, in turn, determine whether or not an employee-owned company is going to work in a way that brings out the best in everyone. Or you find most leaders, and this is part of our education, it's part of our culture, we really have allowed our corporate leaders to run amok, and that's the reason that you have the tremendous disparities between how income is distributed within the corporate world, within the management, compared to the ordinary worker. Years ago, the ratio between those at the top and those at the bottom was 10, 20 to 1. And now then it went up to about 400 to 1. And now it goes to thousands to 1. How is that done? Well, because the ones at the top of many of the corporations are able to select their own board, and those board members generally they work from one corporation to another. It's sort of an incestuous relationship, and so consequently they permit the top people to get that much. But if the employees were owners and they depend on their income from the bottom line rather than through ordinary wages and benefits. Then you'll see that they begin to see that it's their money that's paying people, and they have to justify what the CEO through the board of directors would receive. Now, if you have that, I think you're not going to have the kind of ratios that exist today that, to me, are not justified by market forces. They're justified by, call it oligopolistic or monopolistic forces. That is, you have concentration of power, and the results are that you have this great disparity between those at the top and those at the bottom. And when you do that, the glue, the solidarity within an organization is destroyed.
Right.
So, if we're trying to bring people together, it has to be on the basis of solid principles and principles of justice. And by the way, they don't teach justice in the best of the law schools, you see. And that's what I learned from Kelso and Adler. Kelso wrote this first book with Mortimer Adler, who used to teach the philosophy of law at Chicago before I got there. And I hadn't heard of the book. It was published in 1957, and it wasn't, as I said, until 1965 that I became aware of it. And then I suddenly began to understand what justice is all about and what are the principles of economic justice. And then later, through someone else, I learned what are the principles of something called social justice. Most people think of it as in a socialistic way. But Kelso pointed out, that justice is really goes back centuries, millennia. You can go back to Aristotle and really begin to understand what do you mean by justice. And I wish they taught it in the law schools, because the lawyers come out and they work with laws that are unjust. And I saw plenty of that when I worked in Mississippi in 62, 63, 64. That the legal system was unjust. Well, what do? You have to change it. and justice, just so that we all understand what we're talking about, the essence of justice is that every person is important, the dignity of the person, the opportunities that people have. You have a level playing field. Everyone should be given equal opportunity to develop to the fullest of their capacity. And if the system is holding back, you have to change the system.
Well, I agree. How can we get the law schools to teach justice?
Well, I think we have to debate with them so that they understand what Kelso was saying and what Kelso and Adler by economic justice. Because we have to, I tried to discuss this with the dean at the University of Chicago Law School, and he's just not interested. They don't teach it. You see, what they teach you is simply, here's what the judges say it is. Or this is what the Congress said was the law, or the state legislature. But so many of the laws are unjust, particularly the economic laws, the laws dealing with tax systems and monetary systems, even more important, the banking systems. And now those systems are being called into question because they affect whether the economy is healthy, whether it's operating at peak efficiency, whether it's just, whether there's it's operating in a competitive way, and whether you're able to prevent people from defrauding one another. So,
how do you encourage people to not defraud each other, just as a general concept?
Well, how do you do that? Well, the best way is to have economic a distribution of ownership, which means a distribution of power, economic power. And you get that, and then when people try to defraud one another, well, first of all, the people are going to be insisting on greater transparency and greater accountability within the corporate world. And when you have that, you're going to minimize the fraudulent activities because people's stakes will be jeopardized. They know. It's like, what was it? The ideas of property are so basic that you can give meat to the lion, but don't try to take it away, because if you do, people are going to respond. In other words, the more you broaden ownership, the more you build a just economic system, which doesn't say equality of results, it says equality of opportunity. Work to the extent of your capacity, but you should, as a human being, have equal access to the means, legitimate means, to become an owner. And that's where binary economics and Kelso came in, because they pointed out that people who don't own can become owners legitimately through credit. And credit is a legal concept.
What incentive can we give the corporations to include binary economics?
That's a great question, Molly. The incentives, we already have some, and that is the ESOP laws. I worked as Kelso's Washington counsel, where we got the first, in other words, I was sort of a one-man lobbying campaign back in the early 70s, and then we got the laws passed by meeting with somebody in power, Russell Long, Senator Long, who was then one of the most powerful people in Washington. And we sat down, Kelso and I sat down with him for dinner one night, November of 73, and we went through a discussion. He said, this makes sense. And the next day we started getting laws passed so that workers could become owners. Now, those weren't perfect laws. But they were the foot in the door, and some 20-odd laws were passed, and companies began adopting employee stock ownership plans. Now you have about 11,000 companies with over 11 million workers. When you think about it, it's not too bad, but it isn't the whole economy. What we would do, if you go to our website at www.cesj.org.
Now, wait, what was that again?
www.cesj.org. That's Center for Economic and Social Justice.
Great.
You can download the whole blueprint, which we call capital homesteading. There's a book that we have, which if they want to download it free, they can download the book free. It's called Capital Homesteading for Every Citizen. And in that, it's a total blueprint. So that in Obama, for example, if he's trying to make sense out of the economy, we'll look at it and say what kind of tax laws, what kind of changes in Federal Reserve policy are needed in order to enable everyone to have an equal opportunity to own capital.
Have you had any contact with the Obama people?
Well, you know, some people have personally handed him our book, and he hasn't done anything about it yet. We have others.
But you know what?
Walter Fauntroy, who used to be the congressman from the District of Columbia for 20 years, handed the book to Paul Volcker and also to members of the Congressional Black Caucus and others. And I think Chris Dodd, who's the senator from Connecticut who heads up the Senate Banking Committee.
I hate to say it, nobody reads anymore.
I know.
But so what you have to do is that you have to figure out kind of the elevator pitch.
Absolutely.
And then once you get them to buy the elevator pitch, i.e. the one sentence pithy.
Right. Well, this is where, you know, I don't want to claim that I'm the best at making the elevator pitch, but we've had demonstrations at the Federal Reserve now for the last 4 years.
Demonstrations? What do you mean? You stand outside with
Yeah, you know, we demonstrate. We give talks. We just in November there was one group that is trying to end the Fed. They discovered our ideas and asked me to be one of their speakers, so I was. And there'll be another demonstration in April 15th.
But don't you think the Federal Reserve, since they are sort of in power, are going to have a say about that and object strenuously?
Who, those in power?
Well,
what can they object to? That private property is good for a few and not something that everybody should have access to? That
your logic is impeccable. It's not a question of whether what you're saying is logical. All I'm saying is that to change paradigms at that kind of entrenched level is often, you maybe have to go in through the back door.
Oh, there are many ways. Before becoming a lawyer, I spent 5 years, and I ended up in Strategic Air Command, so I can think strategically.
Okay, I'm sure you can. I'm not trying to tell you that. I'm just saying that to take on the Federal Reserve, that seems like kind of a big.
Well, it is, yet, frankly, I think they're easier. What we're talking about is really easier than bringing about one person, one vote in Mississippi. You see?
Well, I'd say that was equally as daunting.
Well, no, I really think, that included a portion of the population. Now we're talking about 90% plus of the population that's being denied equal opportunity to become owners.
Unfortunately, I don't think they realize that.
Well, I know. That's why it's
important.
Or
they realize that, but they can't embrace the concept of binary without thinking that it's some weird form of communism.
Look, really, it's easy when people say that. So some knee-jerk libertarians will say, "Oh, it's socialism or communism," and I say, "Have you ever read the Communist Manifesto?" And there you can see that the central point, Marx said very clearly, you can summarize the entire philosophy of the communists in a single sentence. You know what that sentence is?
Do tell.
Pardon?
I'm all ears.
Okay, what he said was abolish private property in the means of production. And then he had 10 points for abolishing private property, and most countries of the world have already adopted those points. Okay?
Right.
So that if we want to, Kelso Milton Friedman said this in Time magazine. He said, Louis Kelso turns Karl Marx upside down or on his head. Well, that's right. I don't think Friedman meant it in a complimentary way. I had an exchange with him, and he would not give me the reasons that he opposed Kelso. This is a guy who won the Nobel Prize.
Maybe he just didn't understand him.
Well, he said he debated Kelso and Adler. I could send you, the exchange that I had with him. I was on a panel with him, what was it, 1967, at the University of Chicago. You had Ted Kennedy there, a whole bunch of bigwigs. And it was on the draft. And there's a book published on the draft. And we gave one paper. And I sat next to Friedman for lunch. And I just wanted to be polite. And I said, have you ever heard of Louis Kelso? And he says, I don't want to talk about him. And then he walked away. He wouldn't have any conversation.
Well, what I found with people that pretend to be scientific is they're just masking their emotional attachment to certain paradigms.
That's right.
And so then they try to use logic when it has nothing to do with logic.
But
it's all
don't have any, exactly. I mean, well, there were books on the conflict among paradigms, and that's natural. You had that with Galileo, for example, and so on. Those who accept conventional thought, and somebody comes, your academics are all supportive of a particular paradigm, and if someone challenges the basic assumptions, says no, the sun doesn't run around the earth, it's the earth running around the sun, they can't really understand that until somebody finally breaks through and proves that the initial assumption's wrong. Well, that's what we're up against. We're up against an assumption that the only way you distribute income is through work.
Well, but back to, I'm fascinated, how can we convince the corporations that this is in their self-interest to adopt these kind of economic principles?
Well, here are some of the proposals we have. Let's say that dividends were tax deductible at the corporate level. They are for employee stock ownership plans. That's one of the ways we crack the ice. But let's say that corporations could eliminate their payroll taxes, could eliminate corporate taxes by paying out their dividends and deducting dividends the same as they do wages, so they wouldn't have any taxable income. They would have, you see, that in itself should be attractive.
Right. So basically, you make it a tax incentive, but
well, no, more than that. That's just the start. And because if you do that, then corporations are going to say to you, well, how are we going to finance our growth? We've been doing it internally. We hold on to the profits, and then, or we borrow. We have ways of financing growth. So, but this is just one of the pieces of sugar you can offer a corporation. But even more important, the corporation as a social tool was invented for the production of goods and services in a market economy. And it's a good tool. It's one where you can insulate the shareholders from liability in the event the corporation makes mistakes. So it's given the character of being really a legal fiction. But it's useful. It's a tool. It's a mere tool. Now, in order to succeed, a corporation has to have customers. Well, then you have to ask, how can you increase the buying power, the customer buying power, so that corporations can grow to the full extent that they can within a global market economy?
I see that this could be an incentive, but it seems so long-term, and our society doesn't seem to think in long-term.
I understand. This is why you need leadership. You see, you need new leaders who want to solve problems. Most people are going to be thinking short-term. But then there are going to be people who are so fed up with the system or so hurting, because I think we're getting very close to a major depression. And in that case, people are going to, when they hurt, they start looking outside of the old paradigms. They begin questioning the old paradigms and demand that new ideas be given, that the leaders come up with new ideas. So much of my focus is how do we find new leaders, really genuine leaders. And we had, for example, while Ronald Reagan was a leader who supported our ideas.
Really?
That's right. You can see if you go to the YouTube channel. It's called Just Third Way, which is what I describe as.
I'm astonished at Ronald Reagan. We have 2 more minutes. Is there anything that we'll of course do more shows, but that we can sort of pull all this together? And so it's called Third Way.
Well, it's a Just Third Way. Not
just
Third Way. Just Third Way.
Just Third Way.
YouTube channel. You'll see Ronald Reagan talk to it was called the Presidential Task Force on Project Economic Justice, and we were the ones who got it through the Congress. And you'll hear what this was targeted to Central America and the Caribbean back in 1980. I think it was.
Well, wonders never cease. I never thought that Ronnie Reagan would be supporting binary.
He was a supporter before he ran for Congress. He was a supporter in '64. He was writing articles.
I understand, but I saw a movie called Berkeley in the '60s, and he said things in his governor's office that just made my...
I know, but the thing is, he was governor while I was out there putting together community action programs in California.
I understand.
And you had the Berkeley riots and all. But
right.
These ideas you can sell to the left and you can sell to the right.
Well, that's what we want to hear. All right, well, thank you so much. This has been Meetings with Remarkable People. My name's Molly Cheshire. I've been talking with Norman Kurland, and you can see his Just Third Wave is, and then your website is?
The website is CESJ for Center for Economic and Social Justice.org.
CESJ.org.
Right. And you also, we have a new political party. It's AmericanRevolutionaryParty.us. AmericanRevolutionaryParty.us. Well, keep up the good work, and we will be talking soon. And thank you so much for calling in. Take care now.
All right, bye-bye.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is John Moy, and I flew down from Albany, New York this morning to sort of brief the governor on what's going on down here. First of all, I was a bit disturbed. I've been to a number of these caucus sessions, and I've walked away a bit frustrated at the lack of substance. But I wanted to commend Congressman Epstein for a very enlightened program. The governor's been very instrumental in terms of putting forward economic developments, enterprise zones, but I think we're missing the point of Mr. Kurland, if I'm correct. I was hoping that he could expound upon credit and further incentives in terms of accessing capital to individuals. I understand the frustration of the professor here, but I think what's causing the problems in the African American community, unemployment and things of that nature, I think he touched upon that, and if he certainly would expound.
Money and credit are social goods. They're created. They're instruments that were created by society. They can be used to help people become productive and become owners and get some power, or they can be used to concentrate power. The Federal Reserve was created as a way to create money that was supposed to go into private sector growth. And the way it's going now, that is Section 13 of the Federal Reserve Act, was designed to make sure that local banks would have the means by which they could create funds, even if there wasn't enough savings in the system. It was beyond the old ideas of savings. It said if you have the people, you have the technology, you have the markets, don't stop because there isn't money. It's like saying that you can't build a house without a yardstick. You create the yardstick, and the same thing is money. Today, money is being used to make the rich richer. It can be made to make the poor richer. There are a whole series of points that are listed in the paper that you can get on the outside. It's called the Industrial Homestead Act. It isn't just one little piecemeal approach, but rather it's looking at the system and saying not how you pull it down, but how do you transform or reorganize the system for empowerment. And so I'll give you some examples. The most important is restructure the money system so that money can flow for productive activities. There are the tax system. The tax system has to be reorganized to enable people to accumulate assets so that they can, accumulate at a much more rapid rate than they are today, and so that they can begin deriving incomes from capital, as the rich derive income. That's the basis of real independence, economic sovereignty. If you want specifics on it, I would say you can balance the budget. How do you balance the budget? You exempt the incomes of the very poor. And then above that, all property and all labor incomes, from top to bottom, above that level, should be taxed at the same rate. So it would be a very simple system for income tax purposes, because you would know what the taxable base is, you'd know how much the government wants to spend, there'd be a single percentage, and then politicians would be forced to go and compete for office as to who can bring the best government at the lowest flat rate tax. You can get rid of the payroll taxes on employers and employees. There's a whole series of things. It's impossible in this forum to go to all of them, but you'll see in the paper that laundry list, that agenda for what I call an industrial homestead act. To do for America in the future what Lincoln did under the Homestead Act in terms of making sure that people could get into the land frontier. We have to get into the bigger frontier, and that's the corporate and technological frontier.
Thank you.
And that's what the Industrial Homestead Act is designed to achieve.
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap this up now, and I think we should wrap it up on a note of sort of being, again, unapologetic for the level of discussion. In fact, I think we should be rather proud of the amount of information and brain power that we've displayed here this morning and the commitment to continuing the progress of Black America as we go into the next century.